Welcome to Cub Scouts. When you join Cubs, you immediately start working on your membership award. It won't feel like work, it just kind of happens while you're having fun and learning new things. There are three main parts to this award. Each Cub pack has its own way of running, though they also have lots in common with each other as well. Over those early weeks, you'll get to know the other Cubs and adults in your Cub pack. You'll also learn about the ceremonies and pack traditions, along with the kind of activities that you'll get to join in with as well. So that's item 1 taken care of. Number 3 is when you get invested, so that'll kind of take care of itself. So let's take a look at number 2. Firstly, let's look at the general history and the family of Scouts and Scouting around the world. Robert Stevenson Smythe Baden-Powell was born on the 22nd of February 1857. His father died 3 years later, leaving Mrs. Baden-Powell to bring up her 10 children all by herself. BP was sent to Charterhouse, a boarding school where he lived and studied. At school, BP often found himself slipping out into the woods nearby, known as the copse, where he stalked and tracked animals, birds, and his teachers, and observed wildlife. In doing this, he taught himself how to fend for himself, make smokeless fires, and how to camouflage himself in order to hide from the enemy. They were the teachers who were sent out to search for him. During the school holidays, he would head home to his family, where he and his brothers would go off exploring the great outdoors, sailing boats which they had repaired themselves. They were all encouraged by their mother to make their own fun. While doing this, they learnt how to look after themselves, each other, and the importance of working as a team. Baden-Powell wanted to be an actor and an artist. His mother, amongst others, encouraged him to sit the British Army exams. As a result, he was commissioned as a sub-lieutenant in the 13th Hussars. He sailed to join his regiment in Lucknow, India, where he took courses in surveying and reconnaissance. Whilst in India, BP joined in with the usual British officer way of life and excelled at hunting. BP also wrote many books on various topics, including training aids for soldiers. He proved to be a natural soldier. He became an excellent tracker and was quickly promoted through the ranks. He trained his men by dividing them into small groups who learned tracking and spying using competitions and games. He also taught them how to track and live in wild country. He wrote a book called Aids to Scouting about his methods of army training. This book was later to become the basis for Scouting. He designed a special badge shaped in the form of an arrowhead for qualified trackers to wear on their army uniforms. In 1887, he was sent to South Africa, where he took part in a campaign against the African chief called Dinizulu. The king of the Zulus' forces had risen up and surrounded a fort that had Africans loyal to the British Empire and Europeans in. BP was sent with a force to rescue the fort, escort the women and children to safety, and then to track and arrest Dinizulu. BP's forces surrounded the Zulus, but their chief slipped away during the night, leaving his belongings behind. One of the belongings was Chief Dinizulu's necklace. BP used the beads from this necklace to award scout leaders in his new youth movement to show they had completed their training. The leader would be given one bead, and they had to whittle the second bead themselves. When BP eventually met Chief Dinizulu, he noticed that the Zulus put their shields down to shake hands with their left hand. This was a great sign of trust, as it left the warrior unarmed and vulnerable. BP used the left handshake in Scouting based on this idea of trust in your fellow Scouts. In 1899, Colonel Baden-Powell, the youngest colonel in the British Army, returned to South Africa because there was the possibility of war between the Dutch settlers, known as the Boers, and the British settlers. War was declared, and Baden-Powell and 1,000 men were sent out on search and destroy missions. BP was ordered to defend the strategic town of Mafeking with his small force, and was soon surrounded. The Boers were sharpshooters and had exceptional aims. They surrounded Mafeking with men, rifles, and cannons. At the height of the siege of Mafeking, there were over 5,000 Boers surrounding BP's force of 2,000 officers and men. BP decided to try and trick the enemy into thinking he had a lot more troops than he actually had. In doing this, the enemy would fear to attack, as they would think they would encounter strong resistance and receive heavy casualties. He built small defensive forts, which were sandbags and wooden houses in key positions around the outskirts of the town. He then had his men dig trenches, and using their spare uniforms, they made scarecrows with broom handles and the like for weapons, and placed them in between actual troops in the trenches. For the enemy, looking through binoculars from a distance, it seemed as though the trenches were full of men, when in actual fact there were very few actual soldiers there at all. Due to the lack of soldiers, the boys in the village were put into a cadet corps, who acted as messengers and orderlies. They would often deliver messages on their bikes whilst under enemy fire. BP was immensely impressed and proud of these young boys. It made him realise just what the youngsters were capable of doing. BP also laid out barbed wire fences. He didn't have enough to go around, so he bluffed his way out of trouble by getting the troops to put up wooden fence posts and then to pretend to fasten barbed wire up to them. Again, looking through binoculars from a distance, the enemy couldn't make out the wire due to it being too thin. It therefore looked like the entire perimeter was fenced off, making it even harder to attack. To add to the enemy's worries, BP then got his troops to go into the fields on the outskirts of town and dig holes. Men would then carefully walk over carrying metal tins and make a big show of carefully burying them. From the hills surrounding Mafeking, looking from such a long way away, it looked as though the British were actually laying minefields. This belief was increased when every now and then the Brits would set off a charge in a field to give the impression that a wild animal had wandered onto a mine and blown itself up. One day during the siege, Baden-Powell was having a stroll, thinking over all that was going on. As he went on his way, he passed an elderly African gentleman. The man said that he'd often see BP walking along, but this was the first time he'd seen him looking glum. BP explained he was having a bit of a bad day. On hearing this, the man presented Baden-Powell with a leather lace, which he wore around his neck, saying that his mother had given it to him for good luck, and now he would pass that gift on to Baden-Powell, as he looked like he needed it more than him. The leather lace that symbolises luck is worn around the neck of all adults that complete their wood badge training, and has the wood beads attached to them. The British press kept the public spirits up with constant reports. BP became the British Empire's hero. His face appeared on all kinds of items. The public just could not get enough of him. When reinforcements arrived and the siege ended, it had lasted for 7 months. He returned a hero and was promoted to Major General. He continued to write books on various topics while still serving as an Army Scout. After South Africa, BP was engaged in reconnaissance missions in various countries. His skill at acting and drawing was used to his advantage. He would often disguise himself as an eccentric Englishman or a drunken fool, so enemy guards would just send him on his way and not arrest him or shoot him. He used his artistic skills to hide his observations, so if anyone looked, it would look like a completely harmless drawing. But hidden in the sketches would be plans, measurements and designs of enemy positions and fortifications. Baden-Powell returned to England to find it was on hard times. The youth of the nation needed something to help them take their place in society, and to give them something to do. Already thinking of developing a training programme for young people in Britain, he was encouraged by his friends to rewrite his handbook for soldiers, Aids to Scouting. The 6 short booklets came out every 2 weeks. Boys bought them as soon as they hit the shelves. The books taught basic scouting skills and how to work in small groups known as patrols. Young boys started to form their own patrols of scouts and trained themselves up using the book as a guide. They also went around offering help to whoever they could. Scouting became the new craze, but scouts were getting into trouble for lighting fires in public parks and chopping down trees, amongst other things. Adults were needed to help the scouts along. Soon a few patrols would get together, and with the help of a few adults, the scout troop was born. BP organised an experimental scout camp on Brownsea Island in Dorset. He got 20 boys, 10 from well-off families and 10 from poor families, and put them together to see if they could get on. He taught the boys about camping, observation, deduction, woodcraft, boating, life-saving, patriotism and chivalry. The camp was a great success. By the end of 1908, there were 60,000 Boy Scouts in Britain, and Scouting had spread to Ireland, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and South Africa. Scouting began springing up in British Commonwealth countries across the globe. In September 1909, the first National Boy Scout meeting was held at Crystal Palace in London. 10,000 Scouts showed up, including a group of uniformed girls who called themselves the Girl Scouts. In 1909, BP was knighted by King Edward VII for his outstanding military career and especially for founding the Scout movement. In 1916, Baden-Powell organised the Wolf Cubs, which caught on as the Cub Scouts for boys under the age of 11. Baden-Powell died in Kenya in 1941, on the 8th of January. The world of Scouting he left for us is still full of fun, adventure and friendship. So now you know all about Scouting's history, and that Scouting takes place all over the world. To finish off, let's check out the last few things you need to know. Here's the Cub Scout membership badge. Once you've made the Cub Scout promise and law, this is awarded to you to show everyone that you're a true Cub Scout. The Cub Scouts motto is be prepared. If you're always prepared, you'll find life so much easier. This is the Scout sign. It's used when people get invested and make their promise. It can be also used for the salute when you're not in uniform. The three fingers of the salute as reminders of the 3 points to the Cub Scout promise: to do your duty, to help other people and to keep the Cub Scout law. The thumb on the top of the little finger reminds us to do a good turn every day. The Scout salute can only be made when in uniform on certain formal occasions such as flag break, grand howl and badge ceremonies, or when another Cub Scout or leader salutes you. And we already know why Scouts shake hands with their left hand. It's the sign of trust and friendship. Let's leave the last few words to Baden-Powell himself.
My dear brother Scouts, I am 80 years old. What do you think of that? But I can't say that I feel very much older than some of you. As a boy, I was a sort of Sea Scout, and what I learnt then helped me ever afterwards in my life. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed my life. 80 years may seem to you a long time, but in all my 80 years, I can't remember a time when I wasn't busy. And so long as you are busy, you can't help being cheerful. So if ever you find yourself without something to do, remember there are always lots of people wanting help. You can always find someone worse off than yourself. If you go and help them and cheer them up, a funny thing happens. You find that by making others happy, you're making yourself all the happier too. I want you to have as long and jolly a life as I've had, and you can get it if you keep yourself healthy and helpful to others. I'll tell you my secret to this. I've always tried to carry out the Scout promise and the Scout law in all that I do. If you do that, you'll make a success of your life and will have a very happy time, even if you live to be 80, like me.
Now it's over to you. You'll need to practice the Cub Scout promise so you know it when you get invested.